So I got this email from a second year teacher who talked about how her biggest struggle in the last year has been keeping up with her teacher workload. She talked about how, despite how often she would work on the weekends and after school, she could never seem to manage to get ahead. In fact, most of the mornings she would plan the day of, if not the night before. And throughout the day, she would be planning during the day. And then when it came to grading, she would fall so behind that before report cards, she was pulling all-nighters and not getting a lot of sleep. And when I read this message, it really reminded me of my first couple years of teaching. In fact, that's the whole reason I created the present teacher. I was that teacher who was struggling to manage doing it all, to let alone get caught up, let alone work ahead. And so, what I ended up doing is I wanted to create a space that helped teachers figure out a way to be in the moment and to get all of that teacher workload done so they could be there for their students in the moment without being stressed and overwhelmed. And so, today I wanted to dive deep and get super vulnerable with you and talk about 5 planning mistakes I made that cost me my weekends as a first year teacher. So, with that being said, let's dive in. So, as I mentioned earlier, I was that teacher who was always there early and always staying late. I was working a ton, I was not sleeping a lot, and it was no surprise that by December of my first year of teaching, I had officially reached teacher burnout. By the end of that year, I debated whether or not, honestly, I could go back because I felt like I had struggled so bad. I wasn't sure I was cut out to teach, but I decided to give it one more year. And that's where I started running into the tips and strategies and coming up with my own tips and strategies that I share here on this platform. So, with that being said, here are some of the mistakes I was making when I first started teaching that really led me to working on my weekends and kind of neglecting myself and not working from that present mindful space. And honestly, working from like a frantic, I've got a million things to do space the entire year, which really just stressed me out. So the first thing was planning the day before. Now, I had heard that teachers were like weeks ahead in their planning, but I just couldn't figure out how on earth they were managing it. How on earth were they doing it? At my first district, lesson plans were due the Monday before you taught them. And sure enough, almost every single week on Sunday night before Monday, I would stay up and I would write my lesson plans for the week. And then throughout the week, I would just be frazzled. I would plan the day before and I would look at my plans, not know what I was doing, and just feel like I was, you know, freaking out trying to figure out what I was doing. And that really cost me a lot of stress over the weekends. And it honestly led to some quote unquote Sunday scaries. Now my life looks completely different. Now, instead, what I end up doing is I end up planning a week out at a time, and I don't do it the Sunday before. What I'll often do is like Monday of this week, I'll plan out next week's lesson plans or 2 weeks from now lesson plans. And then, maybe the Friday before that week comes up, I'll glance at it, make sure I'm on pace and make sure I have everything prepped, but that's it. And it feels so much better energetically because before I would work from a frantic state. I would plan the day of or the day before. I would prep everything last minute and I just felt exhausted because I couldn't keep up with my grading and stuff, let alone, classroom management or anything like that because I was so caught like wrapped up in trying to plan and prep that same day. So what I ended up doing as I sat down over a weekend or over a break and I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to plan out 2 or 3 weeks out at a time. And I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write lesson plans for the day. So I sat down over one day over winter break or summer break and I just wrote out 4 weeks worth of lesson plans. And then I'm like, okay, from here on out, I'm going to plan out 1 week in advance. And so on Mondays, I sat down and I planned out the next following week that I didn't have planned out yet. And that way I had a cushion, and that way I was ahead, and I no longer had to, plan the day before. It was already done. And another great thing I ended up doing for this is I ended up sitting down over, again, a break over one day or over summer break. I sat down and I organized my digital files so I could reuse them the next year. So I wasn't scrambling looking for my lesson plans. I could look at my lesson plans and tweak them for the upcoming school year. So that helped me a lot. So that's the first mistake I made, is I was planning the day before, which caused me to be stressed and overwhelmed and just not able to be in the moment for my students. The second mistake I made when it came to planning and prepping as a teacher was I would prep the day of. In the morning, I would come 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes before school started, and I would print out all the papers I needed for that day. The problem was some mornings I had duty, so I couldn't go. And that means I had to go on my prep. But sometimes on prep, somebody had to talk to me, and so I wouldn't get to it that day. Some days I had to go see the principal. Some days I had to go help a teacher next door. Some days I had to go cover someone's class. All this would amount to me not getting that done. And I would be scrambling for things during that day, and it just felt chaotic. And so prepping the day of was a huge mistake I made. And so what I ended up doing is, like I said, I sat down over one day over my break, and I just batched out and I wrote out 4 weeks of lesson plans or 2 weeks of lesson plans or 1 week of lesson plans. And then as soon as I got to school, I prepped out the same amount of days or weeks. So let's say over the break, I'm like, I need a 2 week buffer minimum. I'm going to sit down and write 2 weeks worth of lesson plans. So I did. And then when school started, what I ended up doing is I prepped out 2 weeks out on that Monday. So that way the upcoming 2 weeks I was done. And from that moment on, I could continuously plan and prep that far in advance. And I was no longer prepping the day of. And it felt so much better energetically that way. The third mistake I made when it came to prepping and lesson planning mistakes I made was I was letting the assignments I needed to grade stack up. So I would tell myself that I needed to get caught up in grading, but what often happened is I had the lesson plan for the next day. I had to prep for that day. And so my prep was practically gone by the time that I had time. And by then, hopefully, I didn't have to communicate with a family member. Hopefully, nothing came up. Hopefully, I didn't have to talk to the student. Hopefully, nothing happened. Otherwise, my prep to grade now became like 2 to 5 minutes. Hopefully, I didn't need to use a restroom. You get the point. And so, what would happen was eventually my grading just kept stacking up over and over and over again to the point where I fell behind. And so, the night before or the couple days before report cards were due, I would stay up for all-nighter sometimes and have a lot of energy drinks. And I would just grade everything that I hadn't done that whole quarter semester. And it was overwhelming. There were definitely some tears. So that was one of the mistakes I made, is I would let those assignments stack up. Now what I do instead is I have a specific day of the week that I grade. Everything I did that week, I grade that day. And I send it home if it's participation points. I input it into the data or the grade book. And if it's an assignment or an assessment, I might make copies, I'll grade it, and then I'll send it home. It's really that simple now, which is wild because that wasn't me a couple of years ago. And one huge thing that definitely helped with this is figuring out which stuff I'm grading, which stuff I'm not. And especially in the primary grades, we have a lot of assignments that are like participation, but you're not necessarily going to grade everything. Also, you don't need to grade everything. So what I ended up doing is I ended up having a milk crate with my students' numbers or names, and they would just file the paper when they were finished. And then on Thursdays, I would sit down and I would grade all those assignments they did that week that weren't going to be for grade, and I'd send it home on Friday. So that way it wasn't piling up. I had a set day that I was grading and a set day it was being sent home. Same with assessments. I knew that those assessments had to go out that Friday. So on that Thursday, I would sit down, I'd grade all of the students' assignments, and then I would also sit down and grade all the assessments, and I would make a copy if I need to and send it home on Friday. And that has been a lifesaver. I don't have to stay up grading anymore, and my grades are up to date because I have a set day to do that. The fourth mistake I came up with when it came to lesson planning and prepping was I had too much on my to-do list. My to-do list used to look a lot like this, where I would have lesson planning for the next day, prepping for the same day and the following day, responding to that family. Um, I have to get out the newsletter for next week, and I'm weeks behind and I haven't done it in a while. I have to grade those papers that are stacking up. I have to respond to admin. I have that, PD I have to do. And it just felt chaotic and just draining. So, what I ended up doing instead is I narrowed down my focus each day. I started to think, okay, I have 40 minutes. What can I do in 40-minute chunks? Well, I could grade for 1 week in 40 minutes. So, Mondays were I can plan 1 week out. Um, in advance in 40 minutes during my prep. So on Mondays, I was planning. Tuesdays, okay, I can prep everything that I just lesson planned in 40 minutes. So Tuesdays were my prepping days. Wednesdays, okay, I'm going to grade or do, the newsletter that needs to go out, and any like admin, PDs, anything like that, get caught up in emails. I can do that in 40 minutes. So that was my Wednesdays. Thursdays, grading. I need to sit down and grade for 40 minutes. I can definitely do that. I can get about a week's worth of grading done in 40 minutes. So I would do that. So essentially what I did is, instead of having 20 things on my to-do list, I picked one main focus and got that done during my prep. And can you see how energetically that feels so much different? Putting out fires all day, feeling pulled 10 different directions, versus I got 40 minutes to write 1 week's worth of lesson plans. And that's it. That feels way better energetically for me and how my mind works. So that was how I cut back on my to-do list to be one main thing, and it felt so much better energetically. The fifth mistake I made when it came to lesson planning was not considering my energy throughout the week. I would require myself to lesson plan, prep, grade, email, respond, everything in between in a day. And like I said, on the to-do list, and I would expect myself to do it Monday through Friday. And that was just exhausting. And what I found was, on Mondays, I felt energized, I felt refreshed, I felt good to go. And so what I ended up doing, and then by Fridays, I was exhausted. I didn't want to do anything. And so getting myself to do anything on Fridays was just like grinding my teeth, awful. So what I ended up doing is I came up with a schedule that worked for me. Mondays, I lesson plan, not for this week, but for the next week. So that way I'm 1 week ahead. Tuesdays, I'm prepping, not this week, but next week, once I have that buffer, so I don't have to worry about it. On Wednesdays, I'm going to write the newsletter, or I'm going to write my newsletter for not this week, but next week, and I'll send it out. That way it's good to go. And then on Thursday, I'm going to grade, because on Thursdays, grading honestly doesn't take a whole lot of brain power. I can put in a podcast or listen to, some music, and I can sit there and grade. And that's perfectly fine with me, because energetically, I'm pretty tired. And then Fridays were my catch-up day. If I needed a day to just kind of decompress, turn off my lights and sit in silence because I'm an introvert, that's fine too. That's what Fridays were for. So keeping in mind what is your energy levels throughout the week, and coming up with a schedule to help you do that, is really going to help you. So that was a huge mistake I made, was not considering my energy levels throughout the week. And I just required myself to put in the same amount of effort and work I had on Mondays, on Fridays, and energetically, it just wasn't like that at all. I expected myself to be stagnant, but in reality, it was more like I started really high on Mondays and then it was sloped down by Fridays. And so coming up with a plan and assigning tasks for each day that match that energy level requirement was really important for me. And then by the weekends, I wasn't feeling like drained. I was actually working with my energy as opposed to against it. So that wraps up the 5 mistakes I made when it came to lesson planning. First one was I would plan the day before for the following day, and it just felt chaotic. Second mistake I made was I was prepping the day of, which took a majority of my prep, which means I didn't have time for things like grading and everything else. Third mistake I made when it came to lesson planning was I was letting assignments I needed to grade stack up. Fourth thing was that I had too much on my to-do list. I would have 20 things I expected myself to do Monday through Friday, and it was exhausting. And the fifth mistake I made was not considering my energy throughout the week. I expected myself to do the same thing on Monday as Friday, when energetically I was at 110% energy on Monday and I was at maybe 25%, 5% by Friday. So not coming up with tasks that were aligned with my energy was a huge mistake I made, and it made it so that my weekends were full of work and I was constantly bringing work home. So, with all that being said, which of these strategies are you going to be using? Let me know by either A, entering in the comments, or B, sending me a DM because I want to know. Also, if you want to dive into deeper about, time management, lesson planning, and batching and all that, I highly recommend you check out the Ultimate Prep Guide, Teacher Prep Guide. In there, I share all my time management strategies or my top 10 answers to the top 10 questions I get asked about time management for teachers in that guide. And I link to other blog posts, podcasts, and YouTube videos so you can check those out all in one guide wrapped up with my answers, so you can refer to it as you go and, get free content. Second thing I want to invite you to check out is the Ultimate Planning Bundle. I've been creating resources to help you plan and get prepared so you don't have to work on the weekends like I had to the first couple weeks of school. So if you want resources like how to lesson plan, batching, templates, stuff like that to help save you time, definitely check out that resource, and because it's going to be a lifesaver for you. And the last thing I want to invite you to check out is I have a program called Leaving Work on Time. This program is set up to help you learn my whole entire process to leaving out the door, creating systems in the classroom so you can consistently leave at contract time and not fall behind, and in fact get ahead as a teacher, whether you're a first year or a veteran teacher. And this is something I've been helping not only teachers, in my building in person, but teachers online too. And it's one of my favorite things to do because I really struggled with it when I started teaching. So I love teaching about it because since I struggled with it, I feel like I'm a pretty good teacher at it. All right. As always, remember we are stronger together. If you found this helpful, make sure to share, like it, subscribe. That way we can reach more teachers that need to hear this. As always, remember we are stronger together, and I'll see you in the next one, teacher bestie. Bye.